Hello and welcome to the show. Today we're looking at a transcript of a video commentary that breaks down the Epstein files through, the lens of power network.
It's a very heavy piece of material with some pretty high ambitions. So let's just get straight into the architecture of the argument.
Right. So a key theme running through this seems to be the comprehensive nature of power. But, well, the first major hurdle we hit is scope. The material struggles to maintain a consistent scope, vacillating between a high-level geopolitical theory of power and really specific insular disputes with internet personalities.
Yeah, that's laid out right in the opening. The listener does a fantastic job setting up this, grand premise that Epstein was a node in a global network.
Right.
We're hearing about Rothschilds, Indian tech CEOs, the mechanics of trust. It really feels like we're settling in for a serious talk on political philosophy.
And then
the whole middle section just takes this sharp, almost jarring detour to attack people like Tristan Tate, Nick Fuentes, and Curtis Yarvin.
Exactly. The argument shifts from, analyzing the structure of the world to analyzing a Twitter. The listener spends a huge amount of time debunking Curtis Yarvin's claim about
The refrigerators
on Little St. James. They pull up the actual kitchen plans from justice.gov to prove there were fridges. And look, it's a devastating rebuttal to Yarvin, but it completely dilutes the broader hard truths thesis.
It feels like a category error, right? 1 minute we're on the architecture of global finance, and the next we're in an argument about kitchen appliances with a blogger.
Yes.
Is there a risk that by focusing on just debunking these guys, you lose the structural argument you're trying to build?
It gives it a beef video vibe, not a systemic analysis.
And if I'm a listener who came for the big picture on power networks, I might just tune out when it gets down to that level.
You would, yeah.
Okay, so the research is good, but the framing is a little off. So the suggestion is to integrate the rebuttal of these influencers into the broader theory of how power networks operate. Don't treat it like a separate beef segment.
That makes sense.
So building on that, what if you looked at it from the perspective of, say, myth-making?
How so?
Well, instead of framing the section as, why Tristan Tate and Nick Fuentes are wrong, you could frame it as how misconceptions about power lead to these false narratives.
I like that. So let's take that Curtis Yarvin example. Instead of just using the no refrigerator thing to call him a liar, you could
use it to illustrate how myth-making protects these networks.
Precisely. You could argue that these figures create a mystique, a rustic paradise story, specifically to distract from the logistical reality of the abuse. The fridge isn't the point.
The narrative control is the point.
Yes, that elevates the critique from a personal attack to a structural observation.
And what about Nick Fuentes? The listener mentions a 7-figure sponsorship from a gold company. Right now, it's just framed as a personal attack, like he's a hypocrite. Then if you tie that back to the earlier point about how networks of money buy silence or create controlled opposition,
then it reinforces the main thesis. It moves the argument from Fuentes is a sellout to this is a mechanism by which these networks capture dissidents.
it keeps the focus on the machinery of power.
Not the personality of the influencer. Even when you're talking about internet drama, you're actually talking about the geopolitical thesis.
Okay, so let's move on to the core of the argument itself, because this is where the logic really gets tested. The listener relies very heavily on ethnic solidarity as the glue holding these networks together.
And that brings us to our second point. The argument relies heavily on the lens of ethnic solidarity to explain network cohesion, but the evidence provided often points just as effectively to class solidarity, and that creates a logical vulnerability.
I felt that tension the whole way through. The listener posits that these networks, Jewish, Muslim, Indian, are primarily bound by ethnicity. That's the glue.
Right.
But then their own evidence seems to contradict that. They talk about Epstein, who is Jewish, sending an email to Peter Thiel, who is not.
He's acting as a bridge.
The material makes a really strong case for Epstein being a node, but then look who he's talking to. You've got the Norwegian royal family, Russian networks, American tech moguls like Thiel.
So if the whole network relies on ethnic trust, this heavy collaboration with outsiders really weakens the ethnic thesis. It starts to look a lot more like a utility or a class thesis.
It's like you're presenting evidence that almost disproves your own headline. So the suggestion here, I think, is to strengthen the argument by explicitly addressing and refuting that class solidarity counter-argument.
Or at least refine the definition of the network to account for these,
internetwork connections.
So what would that look like in practice? Because right now it just lists these people and sort of assumes they fit, even when they don't.
Well, take that Epstein email to Peter Thiel where he says, I represent the Rothschilds. Instead of just noting it, you need to analyze why Thiel, an outsider to that specific ethnic group, is the recipient.
So that interaction suggests more of a federation of networks, not an insular ethnic cabal.
Exactly. You have to explain the protocol of that exchange. It's not just Jews working with Jews, it's elites trading with elites. The ethnic bond might be the entry ticket, sure, but class is the language they all speak once they're inside.
And what about that comparison to the grooming gangs? The listener compares Epstein to Muslim rape gangs, talking about outgroup derogation, goyim versus kufar. That's a very heavy comparison to make.
It's provocative, but it's lacking nuance as it stands. To make it robust, you have to address why high-status non-Jews, like the scientists they mentioned, Stephen Hawking, Richard Dawkins, were courted and treated with reverence.
Right. The grooming gangs were targeting vulnerable populations exclusively. They weren't trying to get the mayor to come to their parties.
But Epstein was. He targeted vulnerable girls, yes, but he was also desperate to court the absolute elite of the out-group.
The current comparison just overlooks that whole status-seeking element of his behavior.
It does. If it were purely about ethnic supremacy, he wouldn't be trying so hard to impress Stephen Hawking. You have to explain that distinction, why high-status non-Jews were courted while victims were treated with derision. Without that, the comparison just falls flat.
Okay, now let's talk about how this whole message is delivered. The tone. This was actually the most distracting part of the whole thing for me.
Yes, the impact of the analysis is undermined by a contradictory tone that oscillates between excessive defensive hedging and aggressive colloquialism.
I felt that whiplash immediately. I mean, the listener spends so much time at the beginning and the end making these defensive disclaimers. I am not generalizing. I don't hate these groups. Don't send me angry DMs.
It signals insecurity.
A deep insecurity in the argument's validity before we've even heard it. It's like you're apologizing for the script while you're reading it.
And then, in the very same breath, the listener is using terms like retarded, dork, fucking moron, and autistic to describe Epstein and Elon Musk.
It's so jarring. You can't ask for a mature and courteous conversation in your intro and then call your subject a retarded nerd 5 minutes later.
No.
It makes the speaker sound simultaneously timid about their own thesis and just juvenile in their descriptions. You lose all your authority. If you want to be taken seriously as a political analyst, you can't sound like a teenager on a gaming forum.
Right. So the suggestion is to adopt a clinical, objective tone throughout. If the evidence from the documents is strong, the disclaimers are just not necessary. And if the analysis is serious, the insults are just a distraction.
So, okay, instead of calling Epstein a dork, how do we get across that he wasn't the mastermind people think he was? Because that's a valid point. He wasn't James Bond. He was a logistics guy.
You replace the Epstein is a retarded nerd section with an analysis of his intellectual pretension. The listener points out that Epstein got the details about Socrates wrong.
Well, he got the basic fact right, that Socrates never wrote anything, but then completely missed the philosophical implication.
Exactly. Prove he wasn't cool by contrasting his email tone. Show the emails where he's a total supplicant to scientists, and then compare that to his tone with Peter Thiel, where he's trying to act like a peer.
Show, don't tell.
Right. You don't need to mock his voice or his reading skills. His own emails reveal his desperation for validation. When you call him names, you look emotional. When you show his desperate emails, he looks pathetic. That's a much more devastating critique.
And the disclaimers?
Cut them. All of them.
You think? All of them?
Yes. Instead of these long apologetic paragraphs about not being anti-Semitic, just rely on the specific citation of the email where Epstein himself uses the word goyim to talk about shipping futures.
That's a great point. Let the primary source do the work. Let it carry the weight of that supremacist accusation.
The facts are the shield. Use them. If the document says it, you don't need to apologize for reading it out loud.
Okay, good. Moving to the final critique, this conceptual framework of the fixer.
I actually loved this concept. The idea that these fixers are trapped by their own hedonism and their need for status, it's a brilliant psychological profile. It really humanizes the mechanics of corruption.
It is a strong concept, but the comparison between Epstein and Hunter Biden lacks the concrete evidentiary support that's used everywhere else in the piece.
I noticed that difference in texture, absolutely. The Epstein evidence is rock solid. It's justice.gov files, specific emails, flight logs. It feels like granite.
And then when the conversation shifts to Hunter Biden, it all turns to vapor. We get phrases like, "I suspect that's why," or "seems to have fulfilled the same role."
And that just weakens the hard truth framing. You're putting a forensic argument right next to a speculative one. It's just a vibes-based comparison at that point.
So the suggestion here is to bolster that fixer archetype comparison with specific parallels in behavior or in transaction, not just personality.
Right. The listener mentions Peter Mandelson sending privileged info to Epstein about bailout funds. That's a hard transaction.
That's concrete.
To make the Hunter Biden comparison robust, you need to cite a specific, parallel instance of information brokerage from the Biden laptop.
Instead of comparing their drug use or partying, which is just a vibes-based argument, compare the invoices. Did Hunter broker a meeting for a fee in the same way Epstein brokered that meeting for the Qataris?
Precisely. If you want to say they are the same archetype, show them doing the same work, not just taking the same drugs.
And what about the psychology? The idea of being trapped in the network. I thought that was fascinating, but is it proven?
The listener actually gives us the proof. They mention Epstein's sweetheart deal in Florida near the end of the script.
Ah.
That is the proof. Use that specific evidence to show how the network protects its own. You can contrast that with the paper trail difficulty mentioned earlier. It moves the trapped idea from just a psychological guess to a structural reality.
So they're trapped because the network owns their legal fate?
Not just because they like parties. It turns a psychological theory into a legal reality. Much stick.
So to summarize the flow here, we need to 1. Stop fighting with internet personalities. 2. Clarify if we're talking about race or class. 3. Stop apologizing while simultaneously insulting people. And 4. Back up the Hunter Biden comparison with actual hard data.
It sounds like a lot, but these are mostly structural tweaks. The core research is definitely there.
It is.
So let's just quickly recap the main action items for the list.
Okay.
First, decouple the structural power analysis from the internet influencer drama. If you have to discuss Tate or Yarvin, use them as case studies in disinformation or myth-making within the network theory. Don't just engage in a petty rebuttal.
Make them examples of the system, not opponents in a debate.
Exactly. Second, refine the ethnic solidarity thesis. The current draft leaves this massive logical hole about the collaboration with outsiders, like Thiel and the Russians. You have to explicitly address that federation aspect. Don't let your own evidence contradict your thesis.
Okay.
Third, elevate the tone. Get rid of the defensive disclaimers. They make you look guilty. Get rid of the juvenile insults like retarded and dork. They make you look unserious. Let the cold, hard documents from justice.gov do the screaming for you. Be clinical, be objective, be undeniable.
Right.
And finally, when you're building that fixer archetype, match the quality of the Epstein evidence with the quality of the Hunter Biden evidence. Move from "I suspect" to "here is the email."
It's a piece with a lot of potential power, but it needs to decide if it wants to be a serious geopolitical critique or if it wants to be a reaction video. It can't really be both.
We invite the listener to implement these structural and tonal shifts and submit the script back to us. We would love to see how this evolves into a more clinical, impactful piece of analysis.
Absolutely. There are some hard truths in here, but they need a harder vessel to carry them.
Thank you for listening to The Critique. We look forward to your next submission.